during the coffee break, then during lunch, then in the conference bar at 7 in the evening when the official program had ended and the informal part of the day had begun. He was charming. He listened with the specific attention of someone who was genuinely interested in what you were saying. And this, I understand now, with the clarity that only comes from examining something honest, this attention felt new and warm because I had been telling myself for months that I was not fully seen at home. I was not being fully honest about that either. Peter saw me. He just saw me in the quiet, familiar way of someone who has known you for 9 years, which is different from the electric attention of a stranger who finds you interesting at a conference bar on a Thursday evening. Different does not mean better. I confused them at the time. Nothing happened that evening. We talked until 10 o'clock and then said goodnight, and I went to my hotel room, and I told myself, this was just a nice conversation. This is nothing. I knew it was something. Chapter 4. The weeks after. I went home from the conference on Friday. Peter picked me up at the airport. Eli was in the back seat. He had insisted on coming, which is what Eli always did when there was an opportunity to go somewhere in the car. He chattered all the way home about something that had happened at school, and Peter drove and listened, and I sat in the passenger seat and watched them and felt something. Guilt, though I had not done anything yet, and something else, something I was more ashamed of, which was that the guilt was laced with aliveness that I had not felt in a while, the specific, uncomfortable aliveness of wanting something you know you shouldn't want. Daniel emailed me the following week. The pretext was professional. There had been a contact he had mentioned at the conference, and he was following up on it. The professional content of the email took 2 sentences. The remaining paragraph was personal. He had enjoyed the conversation. He hoped I had gotten home safely, and he was in my city the following month for another event. I should have replied only to the professional content. I knew this. I replied to it all. I told Peter that evening that I had received a follow-up from someone I met at the conference. This was true. I did not tell him what the follow-up had said or that I had replied to the personal part of it. This was the first lie. Not a big one on its own, but lies have a specific quality. They create a private space, a world that exists between you and the truth that the other person is not allowed into. And once you have that space, you begin to furnish it. You add things to it. Each new addition makes the space larger and the other person smaller, farther away, less present, less yours. I began furnishing that space. Chapter 5. What happened? I am not going to describe this in detail. The details are mine and Peter's, and not for a story. What I will tell you is that Daniel came to my city in November. We had dinner. I told Peter I was having dinner with colleagues from the conference, which was partially true. There were colleagues at the restaurant earlier in the evening. Daniel and I left the group. We went elsewhere. What happened that night was a choice. I want to be clear about that. I have spent a great deal of time since then being honest about this specific point, because the temptation to frame it differently is strong, to say things like, it just happened, or I wasn't thinking, or I don't know how it got to that point. These are phrases people use when they want to preserve the story of who they are by removing their own agency from what they did. I was thinking. I knew exactly what I was doing. I made a choice, and I made it consciously, and the choice was wrong, and I made it anyway. That is the truth. I went home that night. Peter was asleep. Eli was asleep. The house was quiet in the way it was always late at night, the specific quiet of a family at rest, safe, trusting the person who was coming through the door. I stood in the hallway for a while, then I went to bed. Chapter 6. The weeks after that. I want to tell you what those weeks were like, because I think people who have not done this imagine it is exciting or romantic or simply terrible. And it was none of those things cleanly. It was primarily exhausting. Not the guilt, though the guilt was real and constant and settled into everything like cold water into cloth, but the management of the thing, the specific, exhausting performance of being exactly who you have always been while knowing what you know. I texted Peter in the mornings the same way I always had. I made dinner. I helped Eli with his reading. I had the same conversations with Peter that we had always had. I performed the ordinary life of our marriage with the attention of someone who has become very aware that they are performing it, which means it was both the same and completely different. Peter did not notice. This was the thing that hurt most, in a way that took me months to untangle. Not that he was oblivious, but that I was so familiar to him, so known and expected and constant, that my performance of myself was indistinguishable from the real thing, because the real thing and the performance had the same lines. I had not changed how I moved through our life. I had only changed what I knew about myself while I was moving through it. Daniel texted. I texted back. Less and less over the following weeks because the texting required energy I did not have, and because each text was another thing I had to manage, and the managing was becoming a weight I had not anticipated. It ended, the thing with Daniel, in December. Not dramatically, no confrontation, no great scene, simply a slowness that became a stop. A mutual recognition that what had started was not going to become anything further, a gradual diminishing of contact until there was none. I felt, when it ended, primarily relief, which told me something. Chapter 7. Living with it. The new year came. I had decided, and I am ashamed of this decision, though I understand now how I arrived at it, that I was not going to tell Peter, that it was over, that no one was hurt, not in any way Peter could see, that telling him would only damage something that had not been irreparably broken, that the honest thing and the kind thing were in this instance in direct opposition to each other. This is how people justify not telling the truth. I believed this. I believed it completely for approximately 3 months, and then I stopped believing it. I stopped because of a Thursday evening in March. Peter and I were in the kitchen after Eli was in bed. We were doing nothing remarkable. He was reading at the table. I was making tea. We were talking about something ordinary. And he looked up from his book and said, with no particular occasion, no particular reason, simply because the thought had come to him, "Laura, I love you. I want you to know that. I know things have been a bit quiet between us. I think I got too in my head about work this year. I want to be more present." He said it without drama, without performance, with the complete, quiet sincerity of a man who had been thinking something true and decided to say it. I stood at the kettle. "I love you too," I said. I meant it. That was the most complicated part. I meant it entirely, and the meaning of it sat alongside the thing I had done and the thing I had not said, and the combination of those three things was more painful than anything I had felt since